Michaela, can you just give me a brief history of the family farm?
Yeah, so what's really unique about our farm is myself and my siblings are actually the 6th generation on our family dairy farm. And for a class project when I was in 8th grade, I went and did a history report on how our farm was passed down. And it started in the 1800s. My great-great-great-great-grandpa came over from Norway, and he came to the Springfield Township, which is the area where we live in, and he bought some land, and he actually dug out a little sod house for himself and his wife to live in, and then from there he passed it on to Christopher, and he was the one who actually built part of our house that we still live in and our barn, and then that was passed down to my great-grandpa Elmer, and then that was passed down to my grandpa, and then my dad had 4 siblings, and he was the one who took it over from my grandpa. So it's been really cool just to see old pictures that my grandpa and my dad had of what the farm looked like how many years ago, and just the history is really neat from it.
What would you say is the biggest change that you've seen on the farm?
The biggest change on the farm, I would have to say, is the buildings. A lot of the buildings, we had a bunkhouse that used to be right by one of our barns, but then it got moved over to our pond. There's been, obviously with technology, and a lot nicer, larger buildings have been put up. So you just don't want those outdated buildings anymore. So definitely how the buildings were all laid out is one of the biggest things that was changed, but also the breed of cattle that we have. We used to have Ayrshire, which is, if you don't know much about dairy, there's 7 breeds, and Ayrshire is a more red and white color, so we used to have Ayrshire cattle when my great-grandpa Elmer had it, but then my grandpa liked Holsteins a lot better, so then we got transferred into Holstein cattle, and now my dad has Holsteins as well as Jerseys. So obviously, living on a dairy farm is something that I was just kind of thrown into. It's not something that I chose, but my parents always wanted me to be really active with showing cows and feeding calves and working with them. So I have a few fun pictures. Every summer my cousins would come over and they'd help us get ready for the fair and work with our cattle and kind of tame them so that they'd get ready to be shown. So when I was younger, around age 3 to 7, I would show with the Pee Wee Dairy Show, and that was always something really fun. I have a few more, but once I got older, I was able to show with 4-H, and then I even did some FFA. Once I got a little older and graduated from the Pee Wee Dairy style of showing, I was really involved with 4-H. I'd show every year in the county and state fair, and then I also would do FFA dairy judging, where we'd go and kind of rate the cattle as if we were the judge, and that was a really cool experience because I learned a lot on what judges actually look for in great cattle. And then besides just the showing and judging part of growing up on a farm, I was also really big into being a leader for the ag industry and holding advocacy positions. So I went on to become the Wenatchee County Dairy Princess, just kind of talked at different community events, different fairs in school settings, just shared why I love the dairy industry so much, and what it's like to live and grow up on a farm. And then just recently I was the Iowa Dairy Princess, where I traveled across the entire state. Again, a lot of different fair events. I went to a lot of different banquets and shared my personal dairy story of what it was like to grow up on a farm. And then I ended it with the state fair. So I was there for about 7 days at the dairy show, in the dairy booth, talking to a lot of consumers. And that was a really interesting aspect because the audience that I was reaching out to, I had never reached out to before, because a lot of my friends and people in my community are really knowledgeable about the ag industry, but when you get to Des Moines and in a larger city setting, a lot of people don't know where their milk comes from. So that was really cool to get to share with them all of my knowledge about dairy. And now that I'm at college and away from my farm and not working on it every single day, I have a lot of respect for what my dad does and all other dairy farmers every single day of their lives. So I've started to take an even more active role, and I started my own herd about 4 years ago. I have 5 of my own jerseys, which are the brown cattle. So this is one of my newest ones, Verona.